going to, of course, start, of course, talking about the Israelites today, and of course, it's kind of a continuation of the lecture I had before that I had, of course, where I had talked about like I said, the Persian Empire and the Phoenicians, and I had also kind of already reviewed on that. If you want to go back and look at that material that I covered on Monday, September the 21st. So, yeah, the Israelites, I'll get into them today, of course, were very famous. Of course, they're called different names, Hebrews, modern Jewish people, of course, the Jews today, of course, the modern names. But these are related to people that were Semitic type people that lived in the land of Canaan, which is now called where Israel is today. Israel and part of Jordan. It's about where they were at overall. And if you know about these people, they're mostly famous for popularizing monotheism because the early religion of Judaism influenced like the other so-called Abrahamic religions, which like Christianity and later Islam. So both those religions were heavily influenced by, of course, Judaism and the Israelites in the Bible, later like the Old Testament, and they worship a God called Yahweh. Which Yahweh, is called different names. Some say pronounce it Yahweh, Javeh. I think it's not really exactly. They know how it was said originally. I guess a long time ago, but Yahweh is the more popular way they pronounce it. And then, like in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, I think it was mostly monks, medieval Europe, started developing a different name, which they called it the Latin name, which is Jehovah, which actually Jehovah, how they said it originally, but people say Jehovah as well. And so that's basically the name of the Hebrew God originally. And so, of course, Christians kind of view it as also being God too, which I guess they mix in with Jesus, and all that. And so that's basically, what that is. So that's where the name comes from. And that's the original name of what the Jews called, of course, God overall. Now, also, of course, here's that slide I've got all on the Israelites if you want to look at that later. But, of course, here's a little slide here talking about some of the background, of course, about the Israelites if you want to look at that further later. You can see here that the Bible, of course, was written in Hebrew. That's why they're called Hebrews, Hebrew Bible, of course, being used. It's a kind of a debate about where they came from, but some believe the Israelites came from somewhere in Mesopotamia because I'll get to later, Abraham was believed to have come from southern Iraq, where the city of Ur was, and they settled in the land of Canaan, which is later called, of course, Israel, the modern name where the state of Israel is. They may have also lived in Jordan as well. So yeah, the books of the Bible, of course, have different names that they have overall. And of course, the Old Testament is the major source on the Israelites that you have. And they call the Old Testament different names, like I say. Of course, one of the common names that, of course, Jews call the Hebrew Bible today is the Tanakh. The Tanakh, which you see there. That's the Old Testament books above in that picture there. And you can see how it's a mix of really three sections. You've got the law, which is the Torah portion, of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then you got the section of the prophets, sometimes called Nevi'im, basically all the main prophets, which are very important. And you got the writings, of course, minor writings, of course, like the Psalms and all that. And that's called Ketuvim or Ketubim, one of the two, how they say it. So if you look at it, those three names from the Hebrew, you can see where they get the word Tanakh, which is kind of an acrostic word from the T in Torah, Nevi'im and the N, the Ketuvim, the T. So T and K, Tanakh, basically. Also, the Torah is, of course, also called different names. Torah, of course, often called the so-called five books of Moses, of course, because it was believed a long time ago, in ancient times, that Moses wrote it. Of course, now they think that he didn't write the whole thing, that it was written parts of it they know of. And of course, it's also known in Greek as the Pentateuch, which means five books. And so that's the other name that they also call the Torah, or five books of Moses originally. So when these books are arranged, it varies on the time period, but anywhere from maybe around the 12th century down to maybe the Babylonian captivity is when most of the books were written and were pretty much compiled afterwards as, the so-called Old Testament. They call it later. They call it Old Testament, though. It's a Christian name because they have the New Testament later. So you got the Old and the New, and so hence the names. But like I said, Jews don't really, call it that. They call it the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh. All right. So moving on, let me also talk about the patriarchs, like the important patriarchs, of course, that are in the Bible. These are the so-called fathers, of course, of the nation of Israel that will be there later. And the three main patriarchs, which of course are the most important, are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So those three are right there. Of course, the founders, you see, like the word patriarch is really a Latin word that kind of develops later, meaning great father. That's what it means. They were around for a couple hundred years. They mostly appear, of course, in the book of Genesis. And of course, the most important early on is Abraham. Abraham, of course, so-called father of the Hebrews, Israelites, and Israelites later. And so they believe that Abraham originated from somewhere like in southern Mesopotamia, southern Iraq. He came from Ur. And he and his wife, Sarah, eventually moved to the land of Canaan. And there, of course, he began to kind of develop like early Judaism. Like he had a lot of the early Hebrews smash their idols. And he began to practice, worshiping, the God Yahweh. And Abraham's important because he's the father of not only the Hebrews, but the Arabs. I don't know if you know this or not, but he had two main sons that he had. See right there, which was Ishmael and, of course, Isaac. Isaac, of course, the most important one of the two. And because Isaac's important because Isaac's the son that the Jews trace their lineage back to. Ishmael is important because he was kind of considered illegitimate compared to Jews and Christians later, but Ishmael was considered how the Arabs are related back to. So Abraham, is kind of considered the father of basically the Hebrews and the Arabs and all that, and the father of early Judaism. So basically, like I said, the Jews are sent through Isaac, Arabs through, of course, Ishmael. And then also you have, besides Isaac, you've got also Jacob as well. He's a grandson of Abraham. And he's a very important Jacob because Jacob is seen as the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. They often call him Israel because of that. And you don't really have to know all the 12 sons and the 12 tribes and all that, but those are the 12 tribes, of course, of Israel that they would have. And all those will be very important later because all those 12 tribes will later be part of what will be later the kingdom of Israel, the united kingdom of Israel that will, of course, be created later. Of course, Judah in that list might be the most famous one because, King David's related to that one. And it's the one that really is the famous kings, David and Solomon, that ruled over the kingdom of Israel. So those are the 12 tribes of Israel. But like I said, I wouldn't worry about memorizing all the 12 tribes and all that. But do know that Jacob is the father of pretty much that. All right. Now I need to talk about next the patriarchs. Of course, under the patriarchs, to also talk about, and Joseph is kind of considered a patriarch too. Another one, kind of a later one they have, which is the story of Joseph. Joseph's kind of later into the end of the book of Genesis, and Joseph, was one of Jacob's youngest sons. About Jacob, he had like 4 different women. 2 main wives, Leah and Rachel, and there was also 2 handmaidens named Bilhah and Zilpah. Bilhah and Zilpah, kind of hard to say, they're kind of rhyme. And anyway, Joseph was one of Jacob's favorite sons. Anyway, a lot of the brothers resented him. And his father gave him this, coat of many colors you see in the picture there. And then also another thing that they hated about Joseph was he had a knack for interpreting dreams. It's really annoyed their brothers. And so one day there were some merchants traveling through Canaan. They sold him into slavery. And so he ended up in Egypt. And the funny thing was that Joseph over time became pretty important in Egypt. According to the Bible, he was a vizier, some kind of powerful minister to one of the pharaohs. And so it's around that time, which they're not sure when this is, but I'll get to later when they think it was. But it's at that time when they think the Hebrews began migrating to, of course, into Egypt at that point. But the Bible says that it may have been because of like famines that were going on in Canaan at the time. And so that's why they all left to go to Egypt, which is famous for its fertile Nile River Valley. Most of the Hebrews were either they herded like sheep and animals like that, or they grew some crops also as well. Now, when they came in, that's a debate. Of course, there's a theory that I think it was put forth first by the Jewish writer Flavius Josephus about 2,000 years ago. Josephus, who wrote in his book, The Jewish Antiquities, said that it's possible that the Hebrews may have been related to the Hyksos that came into Egypt, the so-called Hyksos invasion, which I kind of talked about before under Egypt. That was around the 18th, 17th centuries BC. So almost 4,000 years ago, you're thinking about. And so this happened during the Second Intermediate Period, which occurs between the Middle and New Kingdoms of Egypt. It's kind of a chaotic period. And Hyksos occupied the area of Lower Egypt, were actually pharaohs of it. And so maybe that's why later Moses is like a prince, prince of Egypt, as a Hebrew, because maybe the Hebrews and the Hyksos were kind of related. So maybe so. They never really been able to prove that. But Josephus was using some source from a Egyptian writer named Manetho. But they think Manetho may have been using that as propaganda to say bad things about the Jews, which is still common today, stuff like that. So anyway, let me get into, of course, the next thing to talk about. Of course, so there's some slides if you want to look at there on Joseph. But the next thing is the story in the the book of Exodus, the story of the Exodus story, that you have where Moses, the famous Hebrew prophet, frees, of course, the Israelites from Egyptian bondage, slavery. Of course, very famous story. In fact, one of the most famous stories really in the Bible is the story of Moses, because Moses is considered to be one of the greatest prophets in the Bible, especially for like people that are like Jews today. I know kind of see him as the most important one. Moses is important because he was kind of seen as like, Judaism's great lawgiver, gave them like the 10 Commandments, the Mosaic Law. And of course, influenced other religions like Christianity, heavily influenced by it. Even Islam was influenced by Moses also as well. I think the Islam, they kind of see Moses as an early prophet, of Muhammad, basically. And anyway, yeah, he was raised as an Egyptian prince. There's a story that went around, you see in that slide, where it got to the point where the Hebrews were so many, they were enslaved by the Egyptians, which may have gone on for a couple hundred years. And the Pharaoh decided that he had to get rid of some of them. There's too many of them. So he decided to kill off all the firstborn males of the Hebrews. Infanticide, of course, they call that. And so if you know about the story about this, it was Moses' mother, Jochebed, took Moses, put him in a basket, and floated him on the Nile. And one of the daughters of the Pharaoh found him and raised him. And so that's where the name Moses comes from. Moses, or Moshe, which is Hebrew, which means to take from the water, like from the Nile River. And so that's why it's called Moses. Josephus said that, Manetho's account, that Moses was some kind of high priest that rebelled against the Pharaoh. And his original name was Osarseph. I don't know if you've heard of that. And he later changed his name to Moses. So I don't know which is really the true story or not. But it's interesting that there's another parallel story that's out there that Josephus does mention. So it's interesting about this. There's other sources on Hebrews out there that's not in the Bible, but they're not sure if it's really, possible that's correct or not. So anyway, so Moses, like I said, was raised as an Egyptian prince. Later on, he kills a fellow Egyptian, and so this forces him to flee Egypt. And he flees to the east somewhere, like Sinai Desert somewhere, they think. And they think he may have gone to like an area that's called the land of Midian, where he may have lived for a while. He married this daughter of a local priest named Jethro. And when he was there, he was like tending sheep. He saw this mountain, which had a fire on top, Mount Sinai, and he went on top, and there was this, the burning bush. And it was God telling him basically to go back and free his people. So, yeah, most of the whole story about the Exodus is like, Moses and his brother Aaron, returned to Egypt in the story. And what frees the Israelites is the so-called 10 plagues that they put on Egypt, which took a while. The Pharaoh didn't like the first few, I guess, but you wouldn't still free them. But those are the 10 plagues that they put on Egypt. River turns to blood, frogs, lice, flies, pestilence, boils on the skin, hail and fire, locust, complete darkness. And then, of course, the most famous one, the 10th plague, is the death of the firstborn male. And that's the one that the Pharaoh decided, I've had enough. Let's let them go. Get rid of these guys. They're causing problems. So they basically get rid of them. And by the way, of course, the Jewish holiday of Passover, which is usually in the spring, is usually associated with the 10th plague. That's where the nickname came from, as you know. And of course, in the Bible, in the Exodus story, Moses is told by God to put lamb's blood on the door frame of the house, and the angel of death will pass over, not kill your firstborn male. And so that's where the term Passover, Pesach, is the Hebrew, if you want, where it comes from. So Moses then took the Israelites real quick eastward, crossed the Red Sea. They crossed it and into the Sinai Desert, where he brought them back to Mount Sinai. Of course, they would wander around for years, supposedly in the desert. If you know about this, I'll get to that a little later about that. And of course, Moses takes them to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai has different names. Of course, the Arabs sometimes call it Jebel Musa, which means the mountain of Moses. Originally in the Bible, it was also known as Mount Horeb, and it's about almost 8,000 feet tall. And they believe it's located in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, although it's been debated about whether Mount Sinai may have been somewhere else. I think some of the Arabs actually think that it may have been maybe in Saudi Arabia or something like that. But so it's kind of debated today about that. If you saw that documentary I gave you to watch on Egypt, remember the Seven Wonders of Ancient Egypt? There's a part in there about that, and the mountain is actually near that famous monastery there, the monastery of St. Catherine that the video talked about. So that's about where it's located. While Moses went supposedly up on the mountain, of course, for I think it's like something like 40 days, I think it was, and he wrote down, of course, eventually the 10 Commandments, of course, which were written on these two stone tablets. And so that's important, the 10 Commandments, because Moses is kind of seen as the father of Mosaic law. Of course, also, like I told you, they also think that Moses began writing down the books of what would be the 5 books of Moses or the Torah, although now they think that he only wrote maybe part of it, and then maybe some other writers added later to it as well. And they believe Moses then took the 10 Commandments and he put it in this chest. This chest, this special chest that God told him to build, called the Ark of the Covenant. It was a wooden chest. It had a gold top to it with these baby angels on it called cherubs. And he was given specific directions on the measurements of it. And the Bible mentions it. These 10 Commandments were then, they think they may have been housed with maybe, they think Aaron's rod. I don't know if that's true or not, maybe. And then maybe some of them think they put a jar of manna in there or something like that as well. And then the Israelites then built this mobile tent that went with it, which was called the tabernacle, or also sometimes called the Holy of Holies as well. And the Israelites believed that that was where the Spirit of God dwelled, like lived in it, the divine presence of God, which was called Shekinah. And wherever they would go, they would bring the Ark of the Covenant with them that was kept in this, mobile tent. And they say the Ark of the Covenant, read the Bible, was almost like a weapon. They would take it across a river and it would part the river. Or another thing that would happen was that some enemies would take it or something like that. And bad things start happening, and they'd have to give it back. It wasn't like the Raiders of the Lost Ark where they opened it and everybody melted. I don't know if it was like that. Maybe it was. I don't know. Who knows? Indiana Jones found it, supposedly. Joking. But anyway, so that's what the Ark of the Covenant was. Later, it was put in the Temple of Solomon when it was built in the 10th century BC. And it was put in this room that's called the Tabernacle, or Holy of Holies room. And supposedly the only time that a high priest could go into this room and say the name Yahweh was around when the High Holy Days exists, like just now. This week is the High Holy Days week in Judaism between Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and of course Yom Kippur. And suppose that was the only time they could do that. And of course the word Yahweh was something that they later banned from using. You couldn't use it anymore. I guess you got stoned or whatever. And so other names like Adonai and other names they use later are used for the word God instead. All right. So now after Moses died, Moses, didn't bring the Israelites, back to Canaan. There was this other leader by the name of Joshua, who I'm sure you've heard of. Joshua was later a great Israelite general, and he was, I think, one of several spies that Moses sent into Israel. I think Joshua, Caleb, and some others were sent there to kind of spy out like what's going on there in Canaan. They came back and told Moses that that was the land of milk and honey, that we ought to move there. And so eventually Joshua and his army, along with the Israelites, pushed into Canaan, and they took the city of Jericho. I think it was controlled by the Philistines, I think. And Jericho is considered the first city that they actually found, that they actually lived of course, there. So that's who Joshua is and why he's important overall. Then after like a couple hundred years, they think maybe 200 years or so, they believe the United Kingdom of Israel followed next. It formed, they think, sometime at the end of the 11th century BC. So it's like kind of the beginning of the Iron Age is about when it is. I've got a map showing you basically the different maps of where Israel was in ancient times. They think the kingdom of Israel may have extended from the Mediterranean Sea here to like the western part of Jordan. So it may have crossed the River Jordan at one point. You can see all the people around were kind of like their enemies: Philistines, Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Arameans, and so on. Those are all like enemies, of course, of the Israelites. And you can see on the right later that it broke up, the state. And it was like two rival states: Kingdom of Israel, Kingdom of Judah, which eventually would of course break up. Now, let me talk about some of the rulers that they had. And of course, the three main rulers of this kingdom, of course, the kingdom of Israel we're talking about, the united one, are Saul, David, and Solomon. So that's it right there. And the one that's the most important one early on was, of course, King Saul. And Saul was the one that united all the tribes together, brought them together. I don't know the exact dates of the reign of when he lived. There's kind of a debate about when he lived. But he lived at the end of the 11th century, died maybe 1005 or 1010. And he was from the tribe of Benjamin. And he was the least successful. Yeah, he did unite the tribes, but he wasn't as successful fighting against the Philistines. You can kind of see him here in battle right here. And I guess he got surrounded, if you know about it, and he got killed. He actually killed himself. Battle of Mount Gilboa, where he died. And so what happened, they eventually put in, after he died, they put in King David. King David came in next. He was the next king that came in. He helped reunite them again, of course, the tribes as well. And David was known for, you saw him, a little video I'll put up on my YouTube channel later. If you look on this one here on Facebook, the stream, there was, David was known for, pretty much defeating his enemies. He was really one of the most successful of the kings, and pretty much the state of Israel, was because of him. He pretty much was the one that expanded the territory. The peak of their territories are because of him. He's also known for the David and Goliath story you've probably heard about. Everybody's heard of that story, where there was this Philistine giant that nobody wanted to fight. And so David, who was just this young man, took on basically this giant with a slingshot, and he killed him. And of course, Michelangelo later made a famous statue of him. You hear a statue of David, which was made during the Renaissance. That's well known. David would go on to, of course, found the capital of Jerusalem, which is now the capital of the state of Israel today. That city, of course, will be the capital of the United Kingdom of Israel. Then later it will be a capital, too, of the Kingdom of Judah. So that's David. David also had a famous wife you may have heard of named Queen Bathsheba. And they had a son together, of course, who was famous, who was King Solomon, who we need to talk about next. Really the last major king of the united Israel. And so King Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. Solomon was considered to be the peak ruler because after that, the state starts declining. It breaks up, of course, afterwards. And Solomon was known for being very wise individual. He was, if you know about Solomon, he was known for being somewhat of a writer. He wrote a bunch of proverbs you may have heard of, which were called the Psalms of Solomon or something like that. Usually called different names. Songs of Solomon, I think, is another name they called it. Oh, also David wrote some stuff too you may have heard of, which is some of the Book of Psalms was written by King David as well. And Solomon was, like I said, very wise, very wealthy. They always talk about King Solomon's mines and people wanting to find the mines. They've made movies about it and all of that. And and he's also had a weak spot though. Solomon was notorious for having a lot of women. He had something like 300 or more wives and concubines, and that may have helped to complicate things later after he died, because I guess they couldn't figure out which son to give it to. But he was known for taxation. He raised taxes a lot, which is maybe why he's wealthy too. And that made a lot of people mad later. And so the tribes eventually broke up because of that. He was famous for constructing the Temple of Solomon, which they think was built sometime in the mid part of the 10th century BC, maybe close to 950, maybe. They think they used artisans, not from that area, but maybe they think the Phoenicians may have been involved in helping construct the temple originally. And it became the symbol and center of the early Jewish religion, what we call early Judaism, which had high priests originally, if you know about this. And they built this tabernacle in it, for the Holy of Holies, where they would eventually put the Ark of the Covenant in it. So that was put inside of it. And but the problem was, after Solomon died, that was the big thing. The basically the kingdom, would eventually break up afterwards, and so the United Kingdom split. It split, and you had these sons that had one son. They had King Rehoboam that broke away sometime around that time. In those years, he became the king, of course, of the state. Actually, it's not one of. I'm sorry, kingdom of, it broke up, and Rehoboam was one of his sons who ruled like the southern state, which I think I've got a thing on that one, which is right here, Jeroboam. And they would form a state called the Kingdom of Israel, sometimes called Samaria, because that was its capital, which was based in the northern part of Israel. And they believed that this guy was the guy that formed this state that broke away from Rehoboam's state was Jeroboam. Jeroboam. And he wasn't related to King Solomon. He was just some kind of minister. And then Rehoboam, his state, like I said, Israel splits up, and it becomes known as the Kingdom of Judah, is what they called it, which only had two tribes in it, which was Judah, the main one, and Benjamin. Those are the only two that really stayed with that state. It was based still around Jerusalem. So you got this deal where you've got two rival states that are side by side. You see on the right. And so you've got the Kingdom of Israel in the north, based around Samaria. And then you've got the Kingdom of Judah, based around Jerusalem in the south. So a lot of Jews today still call that area of like the West Bank, Samaria, and all that, and Judah. Those are terms that they use today to describe that area. So that's basically what happened, to those states, how they formed and all of that. And they pretty much remained separate. They never got back together. I think they may have even fought wars against each other, conflicts, I think, at one point originally. So it's kind of bizarre how that happened, but they say it was because of like taxes and disagreements, because Judah basically had all the power, because they were the ones that controlled the dynasty of the kings. What happened to the Israelite state that was based around Samaria, which is the Kingdom of Israel, the one in the north? It was eventually conquered and absorbed into the Assyrian Empire by the end of the 8th century BC, sometime around the 720s BC. It's believed that under King Sargon II and his father, Tiglath-Pileser III, that it was destroyed. Like most of that area, Samaria was taken 722, 21, somewhere around that time when it was taken. And they were absorbed into the Assyrian Empire. And a lot of those tribes that were taken back, like the 10 tribes we're talking about that was in the north, were part of that whole lost tribes of Israel that they kind of talk about in legends sometimes and all that. Then Judah survived as a vassal state. And it was a vassal state to the Assyrians. And it was later conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar, who came in and conquered it. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was one of the main rulers of the Neo or New Babylonian Empire, also called the Chaldean Empire, which was based mostly in southern Iraq, Mesopotamia. And Nebuchadnezzar destroyed basically the Temple of Solomon, and he forced the Jews, who were the remnants of the kingdom of Judah, into captivity, the so-called Babylonian captivity, which would last almost half a century, close to 50 years, that they were under captivity. So that went on for years, and they think during that time that's when maybe the Bible starts to be compiled, like the Old Testament and all that. And they are eventually freed. Like the Persian Empire, I told you on Monday, had conquered Mesopotamia and freed them. They freed the Jews that were in captivity. And a lot of them eventually went back to Jerusalem, and they actually founded another temple, the Second Temple of Jerusalem, so they think was completed close to about 516 BC. And so the Persians were different than some of these other peoples like the Syrians or the Babylonians. They were more open to other cultures, other religions. And so that was why they were able to do that, because of that. Now, later over time, what happens after the Second Temple was built, there is a period where the Jews kind of come back and they have their own state, which I think was called the Hasmonean Kingdom. That was there briefly, but they were heavily controlled by like the Greeks that came in. If you know about this, the Greeks formed the Seleucid Empire, and they gave the Jews fits there. They even tried to take away their temple at one point, if you know about that. And then the Romans occupied, also the Middle East as well. And, that area became like a province, like Judea, and I think Judea in the North Galilee was all areas that were controlled by the Romans. And eventually what occurred, of course, if you know about it, there was a series of wars between the Romans and the Jews. And the Romans sacked the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. That's later when that happens. That leads to the so-called Jewish diaspora, when the Jews are dispersed, throughout the world. So I'll get to it later. That caused the decline of, what we call the whole temple type, Judaism that they had before. And you'll see the rise of, Christianity, which will break off from it. And then you'll see Rabbinic Judaism form, which is based around like synagogues and stuff like that, which will take off by medieval times. But that's much later, of course, when that happens. So yeah, the diaspora, I'll get to that later. The diaspora, that's pretty much something that'll come later. But that's why you have Jews later all over Europe, Italy, France, Germany, England, and so on, Eastern Europe, Poland, and all that, because of the dispersal of the Jews all over Europe. All right. So anyway, I've got a few minutes left. Let me go ahead and also review at the end, just kind of go through some of the topics we covered today, of course, on the rise of the Israelites. And then if anybody's got any questions, let me know later from this broadcast. I'll later, like I said, post this on my YouTube channel today. But it says, who are the Israelites? Israelites, of course, were a Semitic people that were famous for monotheism. They developed one of the first major monotheistic religions, which was later called Judaism, which was based on one God that was originally called Yahweh, which the Catholics later called it Jehovah, the God. Monotheism is like a type of religion based on one God, which a lot of the Abrahamic religions are, of course. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the three most famous, of course, monotheistic religions in the world. Probably the most populous ones, anyway. What is the Hebrew name used by the Jews for the entire Old Testament? I told you it was the Tanakh, which is that acrostic name from the three parts of the Old Testament Hebrew Bible. What is the Hebrew name for the 5 books of Moses? It is, of course, known as the Torah. And, of course, they have another name, too, which is a Greek name I told you about, which is the Pentateuch. Who are the 3 early main patriarchs that are important in the book of Genesis? They're the most important ones. Those, of course, were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, of course, was the father of many nations. He's the one that was, that started the early form of Judaism and started worshiping Yahweh. He's also the one that, is the father of like the Arabs and the Jews, of course, later. He had a son, Isaac, which, the Jews are related to. Ishmael, of course, the Arabs are related to as well. Then, of course, he had a grandson named Jacob as well. Jacob's also called Israel, of course, because he's one right here on the bottom. But Jacob was, of course, the one that was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So all of his sons, his 12 sons, of course, would be the 12 tribes of Israel. So I don't have to know about those, but do know about Jacob being important as the one that was the father of the 12 tribes. Then Jacob had his favorite son named Joseph, who was later enslaved in Egypt by his brothers. That story is very important because it's a story that links the Hebrews or Israelites to Egypt, because a lot of them later leave Canaan and they go to Egypt because of famines, they join Joseph there, who's very powerful as a minister under one of the pharaohs. Then we talked about the story of the Exodus. That was, of course, the second book in the Old Testament. And in the book of Exodus, of course, that's a story of how the Israelites were freed from Egyptian bondage by the Hebrew prophet Moses, who's considered one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament. He's the father of Mosaic law and the 10 Commandments. And so he's considered, the main hero that would free him, but supposedly helped by God. What was Passover? It's a Jewish holiday, which is worshipped usually in the springtime by Jews. It's also Pesach, which is the Hebrew name. The name Passover, by the way, celebrates, again, like the fact that the Israelites were freed from bondage, which was a bittersweet freedom. And the word Passover, Pesach, comes originally from the 10th plague, one of the 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn male, because the angel of death passed over, their houses. And so hence the word Passover is used. Oh, by the way, for years, the term, the word Easter, they used to use the word Passover or Pesach, instead. So what mountain did Moses, of course, bring the Israelites to where he received the 10 Commandments? That was, of course, Mount Sinai, which they do think was in southern Sinai Peninsula, which has different names. Horeb, maybe one of the original names. Arabs also call it Jebel Musa. What was the Ark of the Covenant? It was a special chest that Moses was told to build to put the 10 Commandments in. And of course, I told you the Ark was later put into this holy tent in room later that was called the Holy of Holies, or also called the Tabernacle. Who are the main kings of the United Kingdom of Israel? I told you they were Saul, David, Solomon, pretty easy. And of course, Saul was the first one. He was the one that united the tribes together as one state at the end of the 11th century BC. He was killed, though, and his son-in-law took over, who was, of course, King David. King David, of course, is known for a lot of things. He was the greatest military leader that they had. It's well known. Shield of David and all that. And David was known for his military victories against a lot of their enemies that were in that area around Canaan, Israel. He founded Jerusalem. He and his wife, of course, married. His main queen was Bathsheba, and they had one main son, of course, that became king later, which, of course, was King Solomon. Then you had King Solomon, of course, the last major king of the United States of the Israelites. And Solomon was seen as the peak ruler, last great ruler they had. He was known for being wise. He was known for being very wealthy. They always talk about his, mines and all that. He was also had all the women, I told you about all the women he had. But Solomon's the most famous thing that he's known for, of course, was his construction of the first temple, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, which he constructed, and it was later destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. What two kingdoms formed after King Solomon died? Well, it split apart. They had a northern state, remember, that was called Israel, based around Samaria. It was founded by one of Solomon's ministers, who was named Jeroboam the first. And then King Solomon's one of his main sons, who was named Rehoboam, created the other state, which was in the south, called the Kingdom of Judah, which was based around Jerusalem, the capital. And so those two states were, in existence for so many years until what happened to them. Well, I told you what happened to Assyria. With Assyria, the Assyrians destroyed the northern tribes, wiped out pretty much the kingdom of Israel, and absorbed them into their empire, so-called lost tribes of Israel. That was in about the 720s BC. And then the southern state of Judah was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the Neo-Babylonian state of the Chaldeans. And they were brought into captivity in Babylonia. And the people that are remnants of that are the so-called Jewish people. It's where you get the word Jewish, Judaism from, Jew, are all derived from the name Judah. So hence. But I'll talk more about into, I guess when I get to Roman times, I'll get more into what happens with that, because I don't know if you know about the Romans and the Jews, but they hated each other. They couldn't stand each other and all of that. And they fought a lot of wars against each other. Anyway, that's pretty much it for my lecture today on the rise of the Israelites. Now, if anybody has any questions or, of course, comments about this lecture, let me know. Through my YouTube channel. I am going to, of course, post this lecture sometime today, this afternoon. There is a 10 o'clock one already. If you want to go ahead and watch that right now on my YouTube channel that I've already posted. So if you want to comment on there first, you can, or ask questions about it. Remember, you do get bonus points, of course, for that. Asking me that. Some of y'all forget that. I don't know. I don't care what kind of question it is. You think it's stupid or whatever. I don't care. You can do anything you want with that. So that's fine with me. And also, don't forget, before I go, I need to remind you too about completing the online first exam, which is in quizzes on Canvas. So don't forget, that is due next Monday, September the 28th. We won't meet again. I won't be having another lecture online until probably Monday. So I'll probably send out reminders like I always do every day to you. So remember, check your email, and all that. Check Canvas for announcements and so on. So don't forget about that. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can keep up with, lectures that I post, of course, on my YouTube channel and all that. That's it, I guess, for today. Like I said, if you have any questions, let me know about this lecture. And that's about it for today. So I hope you are okay out there. Got a bad storm come through earlier, looked like it. Looks like everything's going to be okay. I don't think we're going to get much of a storm with that compared to what they thought we were going to get. So that's it. I'll see y'all later. Hope y'all have a good weekend coming up. And like I said, complete that online final exam and quizzes for me and get it done. So y'all take care. I'll see you later.